It was all an illusion. It was all a fantasy. In short, it was all just a dream. Unfortunately, it took me 4 years to wake up. That's when I realized it was all a nightmare. I was the weird kid at the end of the driveway. I was the kid eating his lunch at the table next to the trash can. I was the kid glued to the flagpole. Yes, I was that kid. And it was easy to see why. I never had a father. To her, men are evil. She spent years trying to banish evil from my soul and my body. So in grammar school, I wore pullovers and frilly blouses to avoid toxic masculinity. All in all, I spent my childhood with a target on my back. My mother was a religious fanatic. She tried every religion from Catholicism, my grandparents' faith, to Pentecostalism, but none of them were strict enough for her. Eventually, she started her own cult, which was a twisted mixture of snake handling, the holiness movement, and second works of grace, alternatively called second blessings. Her own feminism was superimposed on top of it all. Funny enough, I later learned that my mother only knew these terms and never really understood what they represented or meant, even feminism. She just made up her own meanings for everything. My house was always full of fat, scruffy women accompanied by either a sapphic partner or a pale, thin, totally dominant husband. This was my mother's congregation. Her followers were mostly women who embraced her hatred of masculinity. All of this mixed with the misery that was my childhood, and it never occurred to me that my childhood was unusual except for the clothes my mother imposed on me. I thought everyone spent hours fasting and praying. I remember that I had friends in kindergarten. At least once I started going there. My mom was careful not to put me in the den of evil that public school was for her. The school district forced her to send me to school when they learned from a concerned neighbor that I existed. I missed the first half of the school year, so as soon as they sent me, I was already an outsider. Everyone else had already gotten over their initial shyness, so I was left alone as the scared newcomer. Also, I had never been around other kids because my mom kept me in seclusion. I never had playmates other than the ones I made up in my head, and they were nothing like those kindergarten kids. But over time, my classmates reached out to me, and I learned the joy of socializing. This continued all the way through kindergarten, although our school hours were different from other classes. We came in later and left earlier, and playground time was spent separate from the older kids, so we were shielded from them. That ended on the first day of first grade. As soon as the big kids saw me, the endless taunting began. There was no end to it, and it cemented my existence as an outcast. The problem was my mother's attempts to save me from the ills of masculinity. She styled my hair, which she refused to cut, into curls that would have made Shirley Temple proud. And although she didn't dress me in dresses, my clothes were all the most feminine things she could find. She never bought me jeans. I wore capri pants or pedal pants instead. I remember thinking that all pants had a zipper on the side. My shirts were girly blouses, all in pink and pastel colors. And my underwear? Let's just say I was well into high school before the question of boxers or briefs came up. The school realized it wasn't the best look for me and asked social services to look into my case. Mrs. Ormark was my social worker. She was also a deacon at my mother's church. The school was told to mind its own business, that my outfits were part of my mother's religious freedom. By my senior year of high school, I was able to avoid wearing the most cringeworthy clothes my mother bought me when I managed to scrape together or earn enough money to buy jeans and t-shirts at the local thrift store. The kind woman at the Salvation Army store took pity on me and let me buy enough clothes to get me through a week without wearing a single dirty one. I repaid her kindness by giving all the clothes I would no longer wear to the army to sell. My mom made me kneel, pray, and fast all weekend when she found out, but she didn't replace the clothes. I was allowed to dress in second-hand clothes I bought, wicked men's clothes, but it was too late to help. After years of bullying, I couldn't fit in or make friends. In elementary school, I was the weird kid with STDs, and in high school, I was the weirdo gay kid that even the real gays shunned. By then, I had given up trying. The humiliation was too great. After Shauna, I wasn't even allowed to have a partner in class. It was the first day of physics class freshman year. Shauna and I were paired up as lab partners, despite her loud and stern objections. I think "not with that freak" was her kindest comment that day. As we approached our lab table, I saw that her stool was dusty and decided to dust it off with my hand. Unfortunately, just as she decided to sit down, my hand and her ass met. She jumped up and very loudly and vociferously stated that I had tried to grab her, as she phrased it, and repeatedly. She continued to talk about what a pervert I was for the next 3 years, until I left that school, cementing in everyone's mind that I was a pervert. My mother's church, with its now infamous castration revelations, as her sermons were called, did not help me overcome that image. So, no lab partners, no study buddies, no team sports, no gym class. All through high school I sat alone, worked alone, existed alone. The only thing the Salvation Army didn't sell was underwear, so without knowing that commando was an option, I still wore the underwear my good old mom bought for me. I never knew that boys wore anything different since I was never introduced to PE. In high school, I never even saw the inside of a locker room. Deprived at home of that ungodly instrument of Satan, the television, I never even saw a Hanes underwear commercial. Unfortunately, the one pair of jeans I bought was a few inches too big in the waist. I pulled them up with a belt, but they were still baggy and loose. Once, when my textbooks were knocked out of my hands, this happened almost hourly, and I squatted down to retrieve them. Timmy Shaw, one of my biggest bullies, noticed the purple underwear peeking out from under my jeans. He cheerfully pointed it out to the older boys. I was surrounded by laughing classmates who pointed at me, pulled out their cell phones, and yelled for their friends to come watch. Toward the end of junior high, things got better. Mrs. Ormark, my social worker, was sent to jail. I noticed that for a few weeks the husbands of my mother's other students seemed very nervous and tired. I don't think any of them slept soundly. Anyway, Mrs. Ormark was replaced by Mr. Jameson. After reviewing my file and talking to the school counselor, he insisted on weekly meetings. It took a few weeks, but eventually he got me to talk about my life, my mother, and my loneliness. I think he was horrified. He remarked that it was a good thing Mrs. Ormark had already been institutionalized because her treatment of me was criminal. He reflected, and after a visit to my mother, when he really put the fear of God into my mother by threatening her with everything from jail to losing her Social Security benefits, he began spending time with me. He became the first father figure in my life. He also introduced me to his brother, who was an attorney. The brothers eventually organized me to sue social services for the abuse I suffered as a child. My case was based on the fact that their representative successfully blocked all attempts by the school to end my suffering. I won the case for a large sum of 6 figures. Mr. Jameson's brother represented me pro bono, so except for expenses, the entire amount was mine. It also instilled in me a love of the law, courtrooms, and the entire court system. This transaction allowed me to apply for emancipated minor status. I was free. Mr. Jameson found me an apartment in his building and taught me everything I needed to know. I had cleaned and cooked for my mother all my life, so I could easily handle those duties, but he helped me open a bank account and get into financial investments by bringing in a licensed counselor. He taught me how to drive and helped me find my first car. We went shopping and I now had a whole new closet. Contact lenses and braces eventually got rid of my crooked teeth and heavy glasses. But the first thing I decided to do after emancipation was to get a haircut. Mr. Jameson took me straight from the courtroom to the barber shop. I cried as I watched my curls fall to the floor. The barber held up his hands and stepped back, asking if he had hurt me. "No," I sobbed. "I'm so happy. I'm so happy." After years of long hair, my short hair was sticking out in all directions. We went to the drugstore and bought hair gel and a hairdryer. Mr. Jameson showed me how much gel to use and how to shape my hair with the hairdryer. I didn't recognize the boy, no, the man who was looking at me from the mirror. I think I straightened up, maybe for the first time in my life. Mr. Jameson took me to sporting events, introduced me to running and the gym. He enrolled me in a karate class, telling me that a man should know how to defend himself. And besides, I needed something to get me out from under the TV in the evenings, which I was quickly addicted to. It showed me a whole new world, a world where people could be happy. He also took me to the Catholic Church. He told me that I had a twisted view of God, religion, and our relationship to them. He signed up with me for CCD, Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, religion classes for the Church of Rome. Classes. He didn't need those classes, but he wanted to be there to help me understand, to provide context and explanations that my upbringing might not have provided. Or more likely, that my childhood would make it difficult for me to understand. Gradually, I was struck by how loving and gentle Mr. Jameson's religion was. It was so different from my mother's hateful sayings. He also taught me how to ride a bicycle. That was another joy my mother had deprived me of. All in all, the second half of senior year gave me the childhood I never had. It was a time when I was learning to be a man. Mr. Jameson, or Will as he eventually insisted I call him, was a real catch. It wasn't all fun and games. They weren't always the most comfortable conversations, but shortly after my 18th birthday, Mr. Jameson sat me down at a table and answered questions that had puzzled me for years. I finally learned what had confused me growing up in this societal isolation I was locked into. Mr. Jameson taught me how to be a man. That's pretty much what my childhood was like. Loneliness, avoidance, bullying, and trying to figure out what masculinity was that my mother tried so hard to protect me from. When I became emancipated, other problems were discovered. My tongue was tied when interacting with people. Even with Will, I had difficulty expressing myself, stuttering and whispering. The stuttering especially interfered with my ability to be quiet. Imagine a guy in pedal pushers and a ruffled blouse slowing down, in high school. Not the most pleasant picture. To help me socialize and correct my speech, Will got me a speech therapist. I'm not sure exactly what he arranged, but it didn't take her long to fix my speech problems. The fact that I was a stunningly beautiful woman also helped me become more confident with women. It was marvelous. When our sessions went on even longer than I thought they should, I didn't mind. I was just happy to have more opportunities to look at that beautiful cleavage. I never made it back to my school. Will had made the brilliant move of getting me into an elite private school for my senior year. It was his alma mater, and he pulled a lot of strings and enlisted support to get me a job there. I was still shy, but I had a good build and a nice face, and my shyness was mistaken for a strong, silent type. Girls asked me out on dates and dances. Without further ado, I became somewhat popular. I made friends, went to movies and parties, took girls out to dinner. Suddenly, I was just an ordinary teenager, albeit an emancipated one. A week before high school graduation, my mom reappeared in my life. Somehow she knew where I lived, and as Will and I were coming home from karate class, she ran across the street with a knife raised above her head, screaming that God demanded my purification. I froze with fear. 18 years of living with my mother was hard to avoid. Will rushed to my side, coming between me and the Sheridan, running toward us. Was he risking his life for mine? The thought flashed through my paralyzed brain. But it was not to be. Mom ran out in front of the speeding truck. I swear I heard a crunch when it hit her. And just like that, a major female influence in my life was gone. I had mixed emotions. My mother was never a nurturing person, but she was my mother. I hated her, but I also loved her. Why? Yes, she made my life miserable, but when I was sick or in pain, she nursed me and comforted me. People have told me that my mother was evil, but I don't think so. She was delusional and had twisted beliefs, but she really believed in them. I don't think she ever intentionally hurt anyone, although I know she would have hurt me eventually. But I am sure that somewhere in the depths of her brain, she believed that God had spoken to her and, like Abraham on Mount Moriah, asked her to sacrifice her son. But beyond the demands of her God, she was always kind to the women in her church, helping many of them through abusive relationships or financial problems. She was even kind to the men who asked for or needed help. All her life, my mother was on some form of welfare, But she never hesitated to share money or food with anyone she thought was in need. Yes, she made my life hell, but despite her beliefs, I think she loved me. Will insisted I see a therapist because I had witnessed my mother's death. I had one meeting with this therapist. She noted, tellingly, that I had never shed a tear over my loss. The only thing she said was that my primary feeling about my mother's death was, above all else, relief. I agreed and never went back. Personally, I liked Mona's therapy better than this psychobabble. Will insisted I go to an Ivy League college and pulled strings again to get me into his alma mater. I had an amazing 4 years, but the most amazing of them all were the women, culminating in the goddess Eve. Eva and I met at a frat party during my junior year. By then, I was fully acclimated and socialized, largely due to Will's help and example. I was relatively popular, being the star of the college chess club, a member of the cycling team, not as grandiose as being a member of one of the real sports teams, but it had a certain cachet with some female students, and a member of one of the best fraternities. Yes, it was Will's fraternity. I was treated like his legacy. Academically, I had every chance of graduating with honors, if not distinction. And my life was great. At least that's what I thought. But then I met Eva Stokes. She was a year behind me and had joined the chess club in junior high. She was an honest but uninspiring player. Gradually, when we started dating, she confessed that she joined the club for the sole purpose of meeting me. Flattering, to say the least. But by the time of this confession, we were already exclusive. When I realized I couldn't fully meet her needs, we had a conversation about sharing, instigated by me. I was afraid I would lose her to her frustrations, that her attraction would lead her to infidelity. Matt, she raised her head and stared at me with panic in her eyes. Are you saying you're going to split me up? Or are you breaking up with me? She grabbed my hands. I was surprised by her question. It wasn't until I heard the words come out of my mouth that I realized they were somewhat ambiguous. No. I shook my head. I don't want either of those things. I don't think I could share you. The thought of being with someone else torments me. Just thinking about it makes me so angry I could punch a hole in the wall with annoyance. And I don't want to break up with you either. I know we haven't said it yet, but here I hesitated before taking that step. I love you. I want to marry you. Eva's eyes lit up, and she started to reach for me. I stopped her. I know you often get frustrated with my inability to keep up with you. I continued. More than anything, I want you to be happy, and I want to avoid any more pain than the pain I would cause by losing you now. But if you don't think monogamy is right for you, then we should break up right now. I don't think my heart can take it later. Tears ran down her face. Please don't leave me. You're all I've ever wanted. You are more than enough for me, and if I need more, I have Ernie. I want to marry you too. That's my greatest wish. It's all I ever think about. I'm yours and yours alone forever. She pulled me to her, resting her face against my chest. Eventually, we both ended up in bed. Later, she asked if my proposal was accompanied by a ring. I wondered if stating that I wanted to marry her was a proposal, and decided that even if it wasn't, I wanted it to be. We went ring shopping the next day and got married the week after I graduated. We went on our honeymoon and were desperately in love. She even left Ernie at home, a rarity I didn't know about yet. Our honeymoon was interrupted when Will suddenly became ill. Howard contacted me and advised me not to delay coming home. We rushed, even chartering a private jet, but we arrived only a few hours late. Will had passed away. Unlike my mom, I shed a flood of tears for Will. He changed my life and was the source of everything good and joyful in my life. To this day, I still miss him. He truly was my father, in every sense of the word. As a social worker, Will was not a rich man. He had a home inherited from his parents, which he co-owned with his brother Howard. He also had a well-filled 401k. His brother informed me that Will had named me as his sole heir. I tried to give Howard my share of the house, saying it should go to him since it was inherited from his parents. He refused my offer, saying that Will considered me his son, and he, Howard, his nephew. We were a family, and he hoped I would live in the family home. Eva and I moved into the house as soon as Will's trust was executed on me. After the bar exam, I took Eva on a month-long vacation to replace the honeymoon we missed. I rented a fancy schooner, and we traveled around the South Pacific for a month. It was gorgeous. We made love under the southern sky on secluded beaches and on the deck of the schooner anchored while the crew slept. Ernie accompanied us on this trip, as he did on all trips after our first honeymoon. Eva needed to get her needs met, she explained. The crew was first alarmed and then amused by the sounds coming from our cabin while I was on deck. I thought, as long as Eva was happy, I wouldn't worry. And she was happy. We were both happy. We came back tanned, fit, and surprisingly in love. Eva got a job teaching at a community college. She had a choice between an elite private high school or a junior college. The high school paid more, but Eva explained that she thought she could get further in college. Besides, she saw herself as a college professor rather than a high school teacher. She planned to pursue a doctorate in philosophy. I paid off all of her student loans as well as her graduate school expenses. I could easily support her until she got her PhD. I went to work for Will's brother's firm, Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. They practiced both commercial and criminal law. Ed Fisher did mostly criminal cases, and Howard, along with Terrence Atkins, focused on the commercial side. They were not a large firm but were well respected. It was a good option, and I served as Ed's assistant for another 12 weeks, which I had to wait for the results of the college exam. Legally, I couldn't work as an attorney, but Ed felt comfortable with me working in the background on his cases. I really wanted the full Perry Mason experience and was disappointed that we were not representing murderers at the time. Most of our cases were simple assaults, road rage, domestic fights, or common crimes, burglaries, shoplifting, or car thefts. Even more frustrating was how often they were resolved by plea bargaining. It was several months before I saw the inside of a courtroom. Ed explained that in most cases, two factors were decisive: the likelihood that the client would be proven guilty or could the client afford to fight in court. Even those cases that the court has required us to take on pro bono have usually settled. You have to understand, most of our clients are guilty. They tend to be career criminals and are very realistic about their chances. They prefer to plead guilty, save court time, and serve a third or less of the sentence they would have gotten if they had gone to trial. So much for Perry Mason. Ed joked that I should have spent my childhood watching Let's Make a Deal. Let's hear it from Monty Hall and Wayne Brady. At the time, this joke passed my consciousness. Eve explained it to me later. While law was turning into a frustration, Eva started teaching and was in love with it. She came home every day happy that the students seemed to appreciate her lectures. When I asked who appreciated it more, men or women, she looked at me strangely and asked why it mattered. When I said that they probably appreciated her face and figure more, she got angry and wouldn't let me touch her. It was our first fight and the first time I slept on the couch. The next day, I managed to convince her that I was joking and in no way meant to belittle her teaching skills or lectures. I realized how serious she was about teaching and how much the respect she felt she owed her meant. After that, I approached conversations about her career cautiously. Ernie made more and more frequent appearances in our bedroom. Eva usually got home much earlier than I did, and often when we went to bed, I could tell that Ernie had been at her place the day before. I figured it was Ernie. Eva had never given me any reason to suspect her of infidelity. When the results of the bar exam finally came out, I passed. Not only did I pass, but I was in the 90th percentile, scoring 320 on the USC. Howard, Ed, and Terry were thrilled. I was now a full-fledged employee of the firm. Even though I had become one of the 20, I was still beyond happy. Everyone was congratulating me on my high score, or so it seemed to me. It took me a while to realize that I had lost someone I considered a good friend. Robert Garcia and I often had lunch together and got the same cases. Outside of work, Gloria and Eva became good friends, and the four of us often went out together. We were a good team, I thought, especially for someone who hadn't yet passed the bar exam. Bobby had graduated from law school the year before me, and although we both took the exam in July, it was the first time I had taken it and the third time Bobby had taken it. This time he passed after 2 failures. But even now he had only scored 265, which was only 5 points above the required 260. He came into the office, happy to have passed the exam, but seemed to grow sad when another assistant told him my score. Suddenly Bobby had other lunch plans, and Gloria had other friends she needed to reacquaint herself with. Eva felt the rejection as much as I did and demanded to know what I had done to our friends. At that point, I didn't know, and when I approached Bobby, he first assured me that it was no big deal, and then added sullenly, "Jesus, do we really have to kiss your ass all the time?" He walked away, leaving me shocked and offended by his statement. Then another co-worker who overheard the conversation told me how badly he reacted to my success. "He's just jealous, man. Not only did you pass the exam the first time, but you beat all of our scores. You're a star." When I told Eva what was going on, she couldn't believe it. She didn't believe that Gloria would leave her just because her husband was jealous. For the next few months, she refused to read the writing on the wall, sending Gloria invitation after invitation, but finally gave in. Her heart was broken. Eva was originally from the north and didn't know anyone in my hometown. Gloria became her main thumper and friend. They both worked in education, with Gloria teaching at a Christian high school. My wife was heartbroken and could not settle down. We eventually found common ground with people at the community college, but she didn't want to socialize with anyone from the law firm. I started going to lunches by myself. It reminded me of middle school. I felt isolated, and ironically, it made me isolate myself even more. And one day I came into the office and found other employees looking at me and giggling. It went on like that for a week. Then, underwear started showing up on my desk. I didn't know what to do. My tongue began to slip when I made presentations in front of giggling coworkers. Ava laughed at me when I started stuttering at home, and when she saw my face, she hugged me and asked me what was wrong. I told her what was going on at work, but she said they were all jealous of me and I should ignore them. As the days went by and my verbalizations were failing more and more, Ava lost her patience and told me to get a grip. It was the second night I slept on the couch. The next morning she apologized to me but said, "Really, Huck, this is a problem only you can solve. Just get out of your head and things will get better." It was obvious that she was losing respect for me, and it was affecting our lives. I missed Will. He would have helped me work through these issues. Eventually, my stuttering began to undermine the cases I was working on. Clients had trouble understanding me. My work began to disappear too, sometimes misfiled, and more often missing altogether. Bobby chuckled and smirked when I embarrassed myself in front of a client. I knew it was him, but I had no proof. Eventually, I was called into a meeting with the partners, and Howard demanded an explanation of what was going on. I tried to explain that I felt alienated, that I was being groped. I explained how my documents were disappearing, and in some cases being rewritten with errors that I would never have missed. In less than 2 months, I went from a star to a stuttering, tongue-tied embarrassment. I thought I had overcome the trauma my mother had inflicted on me, but it all happened again. I felt like I was there again, tied to the flagpole. And apparently, I was. During the meeting, Howard's computer beeped with an incoming message. Thinking it might be important to the current case, he opened it. A shocked expression appeared on his face. I noticed him scrolling through several images. "I think I know what this is about, Huck. You still have friends among the aides, and one of them forwarded me some emails that were sent to all the aides except you." With those words, he turned the laptop around so that I could see the gallery of photos he was looking through. "These were sent months ago. Your friend should have sent me these then." There I was with my Shirley Temple-style curls glued to a flagpole. Photo after photo documented my childhood, including a video of my mother standing behind the pulpit preaching. The nightmare of my childhood, on display for all to see. I got up and walked out. Howard called out to me repeatedly, but I didn't stop and didn't dare go back. I was too depressed to even stutter. As I walked out of the office, I saw Bobby and a few other employees laughing. Perhaps Bobby was the friend who forwarded the letters to Howard, if only to cement my humiliation in front of the partners. In the evening, I sent my resignation letter to the firm. Eva tried to talk me out of it, asking what was I going to do if I quit. Any law firm in town would probably have gotten those pictures from someone who had sabotaged me at Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. And she was happy in college and didn't want to move to another city. Once again, she told me I had to man up. I opened my briefcase to get my thermos and clean it, and to my surprise, several pairs of underwear fell out of there. Ava looked at them and smirked. I should have known, she said. Gloria told me we were cut out because you were hitting on Bobby. That's probably why you can't have a relationship anymore. So much for monogamy. She left and slammed the bedroom door shut. This was the third night I slept on the couch. I couldn't believe that my wife, with whom I had lived for over 4 years, could have such thoughts or believe this slander. I felt alone, even more alone than I had felt as a child. Without Ava, I was lost. My life had seemed perfect, but now it seemed an illusion. In the morning, I woke up to Eva saying, I can't bear the disappointment you're putting me through. She pulled on her coat and gloves. I agreed to be monogamous, but you don't seem to want that. She smirked again, then continued. You know, I targeted you in college. You had a great bank account. No family to interfere, no trust fund to block me. And the girls talked about how great you were in bed. I don't see it. I never have. Well, at least I paid off my student loans and my master's degree. Our divorce settlement should cover my doctorate. I'm going to stay with Bobby and Gloria for a while we get everything settled. Eva turned and walked out. It appeared that she had already packed her things and loaded them into the car. I sat stunned, watching her walk away down the street. But she loved me, I thought to myself. I couldn't believe she didn't. Howard showed up the next day. He refused to accept my resignation. I was family, and he needed me at the firm. How can I even show my face in public? I asked. They've all seen me like this. Take a resignation letter. I was so distracted by my missing Eve that I didn't stutter or whisper at all. Howard sat looking at me for a minute. You know, when Will first told me about you, he described a child with an incredibly horrible childhood. He described it as heartbreaking. He doubted that you would ever be able to overcome those horrible experiences. But he was determined to help you and was so proud of you, of how well you had recovered. He bragged about your strength. He laughed fondly at the memory that came to him. He called you Superman, a heroic figure. He called you his son. How proud he was of you. He stood up, getting ready to leave. Your job is for you. You're my nephew, but besides that, you're our best assistant, or will be when you gain experience. Ed says he'll be in trouble without you, that you understand some things better than he does. You know, the only thing that's changed is that more people know how you suffered as a child. It doesn't change what happened, and it sure as hell shouldn't change who you've become. Take your time and work on your linguistic skills. Mona told me to call her. He put a piece of paper with a phone number on the table and left. I didn't contact Mona. I didn't go back to work. For 3 days, I sat in misery, waiting for Ava to return. Phone calls and emails went unanswered, not only to Ava, but also to Gloria and Bobby. I was alone. Finally, on the third evening after she left, I drove to Bobby's house. I was determined to meet my wife face to face. The lights were on in the house, but no one answered my knock. Someone had to be home. I headed into the side yard. Bobby and Gloria's house stood on a hill, with a view of the valley from the back deck and pool. It afforded them the privacy most of us were denied. As I opened the back gate, I heard sounds. I pulled out my phone and peeked around the corner. There on the deck, Eva, Gloria, and Bobby together. His new roar alarmed the ladies, who looked up to see me delivering a few more kicks to my lying lover. "Don't touch him!" exclaimed Ava, as both she and Gloria moved to stand between us. "What the hell?" I demanded. "You're my wife. What happened to monogamy?" She smirked. "You gave it up when you came out as gay. Besides, I lied." Eva bestowed a sly smile on me. "I got a job at the college because my friend Ernie is a coach there. We've been having fun even before we got married." "I am not gay. That's just a lie, Bobby." I wasn't sure why exactly the thought of being gay upset me in Eve's tirade. I suddenly realized that I didn't care anymore. I turned off the phone I was holding in my hand. "You know what? They can take you away." "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I think Uncle Howard might have something to say about Bobby's employment after I file for adultery, naming those two as co-defendants. And Ernie too, if I find any evidence against him." I looked at my former friend's wife. "And Gloria works at the church. They might find this video disturbing too." Gloria blushed. Bobby only groaned painfully. "The good news is that I'm unemployed. My investments predate our marriage. Will's inheritance, including our house, is in a trust for me, excluding you, and the court will likely award me alimony since you are now the breadwinner in our marriage." I turned and walked away. I left through the house, figuring it was the shortest way. As I passed the open bedroom door, I saw the former Ernie standing proudly on the bedside table. I stepped aside and picked him up. I had plans for him. The new series of humiliations showed me what Howard had tried to tell me and what Will saw in me. I had a strong character. I could face it all and find a better way to live. That's what Will had taught me. I let Howard know that I would be back as soon as the divorce was finalized. I wanted my wife to be the breadwinner in this marriage after the divorce. With my investments, I might not get alimony, but I could afford to try to get it, just to torture Eve. And I would do my best to keep her penniless when the divorce was final. When I got home, I'd close our credit cards and make sure all the accounts were emptied. I planned to pursue Bobby in court. I would appear on the other side in any case he worked on, pro bono. I planned to humiliate him until no decent law firm would hire him. And Gloria? I figured that getting her away from Bobby with the help of the most beautiful women I could hire as her mistresses, only to have them dump her as soon as her marriage fell apart, would be punishment for both Garcias. Besides, I had no hard feelings toward Gloria, other than the ones that were sure to arise when I watched the video I had made. I sent the video to the cloud and went home to do two things: introduce Ernie to my barbecue and find that piece of paper with Mona's phone number. She was only 5 years older than me. I think I needed another graduation ceremony. This could be fun. Part 2. The door was opened by the most beautiful and gentle girl Habakkuk had ever seen. She looked at him with an expression of intense concentration. "May I help you, sir?" the little lady asked formally. Huck knelt down in front of her, bringing their eyes together. "Perhaps," Huck began. "Are you mistress of the house?" The girl threw him the look that all little girls seem to master. "Are you crazy, mister?" And then turned and shouted into the house, "Mama, there's some man at the door." When Habakkuk stood up, the adult version of the little lady opened the door fully. "Can I help you?" she asked suspiciously. "Are you Meredith Larkin?" Huck asked, holding out his business card to the woman. Glancing at the card, the woman's eyes widened in panic. The words attorney seemed to catch her eye. She hesitantly answered in the affirmative. "What does that mean?" she asked with trepidation. Habakkuk sensed the fear that gripped the woman and tried his best to reassure her. "I am not here to add to your problems," he told her. "In fact, I hope you'll let me help you." He gave her his brightest smile. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "As you can see from my business card, I'm an attorney. You are being sued by your former neighbor and tenant for wrongful possession of your property. I would like to represent you in this case." Shaking his head and beginning to close the door, Huck added, "At no charge, of course." The closing door paused, then opened again. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Smiling, he replied, "A fair question, but a long answer. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss it in the house or here on the porch." Still incredulous, Meredith agreed to sit on the porch, not hesitating to offer Huck coffee, which he accepted. As soon as she returned with the drinks, Huck began his story. The lead attorney on the plaintiff's side is a former friend named Robert Garcia. I've vowed to destroy him in court in all cases in which he appears or is associated with. That's pretty much it. Why? Again, why would you do that? What has he done to you? Meredith wondered how honest a vindictive man could be. Habakkuk was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I understand your suspicions, and I can tell you'll be asking why, until I tell the whole story." He sipped his coffee. "Did you grow up in these parts?" he asked. When she said yes, he inquired, "Have you ever heard of Rita Mason? About the feminist church?" Meredith's face lit up with recognition. "Castration revelations?" She laughed. "Oh, God, I remembered that. That woman was crazy." Huck looked down. "She was my mother." Meredith's face lowered. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry." Huck muttered that she wasn't as sorry as he was. "But wait," she asked. "Your card says your last name is Jameson, not Mason." "I took the last name of the man who helped me get out of the hell my mother raised me in. He was my social worker." Huck began his story by recounting the steps his mother took to save him from toxic masculinity, how she thought he was the spawn of Satan. "Your own mother," whispered Meredith sympathetically. "What a horror." Huck had led her through his life. The humiliations of childhood, the salvation Mr. Jameson had provided, the emancipated minor, college, Eve and his marriage. He didn't go on about the plastic and real Ernie, it was too much for a stranger. Law school while Eve was getting her master's degree. Bobby's jealousy and the destruction of his marriage. "And she never loved you," Meredith muttered thoughtfully. "So," Huck summarized, "I've tried to rise above it. I'm not a violent man, but I can't be attacked and left to my own devices. So I'm going up against Bobby in court, offering him the humiliation that bothers him the most. So far, he hasn't shown up in the courtroom, but when I find out he's involved in a case, I do whatever I can to help the other side. I haven't always won, but that's because I mostly stand on the sidelines. Lawyers don't like it when I get involved, even if it's to help." He shrugged. "But this time he's going to trial, and I heard you haven't hired a lawyer yet. Why?" He looked at the woman and saw sadness settle on her face. "The money. Why else?" She took the napkin she'd brought along with her coffee and blotted her eyes. "When my husband died, we had more debt than savings, and working 2 jobs, I only make enough to keep from paying bills. I can't afford a lawyer." Here the woman broke down and openly sobbed, the frustration of the last year overwhelming her. The little girl who had been eavesdropping through the window opened the door and threw herself into her mother's arms, hugging her tightly. Habakkuk silently vowed to save this woman and child, no matter the cost. Next chapter. The divorce had been finalized within the last month. Habakkuk delayed his revenge until after the divorce and financial decisions were made. As he had anticipated, because of his trust and investments, the court denied him spousal support, even though he was unemployed and his wife was still working. But the tape of his wife grinningly telling him how she targeted him in college for his money made him pay for her education, including student loans, and planned to fund her doctoral dissertation convinced the judge that what they entered the marriage with was what they should get out of it. His investment remained his. Eva was left penniless, as she had been in college, though she retained her school district pension. Huck had no claim on her income and benefits. On the other hand, she had no claim on his house, so she continued to live with the Garcias. The only retaliation he initiated was against his old buddy Bobby. Robert Garcia was immediately fired from Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher once it was discovered that he was the source of the emails revealing Huck and his childhood traumas. He was eventually hired as a junior associate at the ambulance-chasing firm of Stiller and Myers. Huck, still formally unemployed, though he had helped Ed Fisher on some criminal cases, behind the scenes and without pay, offered his services on a pro bono basis to the companies Stiller and Myers was suing if Bobby was assigned to the case. A clerk at the firm was willing to keep Huck informed of Garcia's workload for a fee. Although Huck was working alone, Howard Jameson was happy to offer Huck the services his firm could provide as support. The assistance was considerable. Huck was able to successfully defend the companies in all of the cases in which he was involved. 2 companies declined his offer, and he was turned down several more times by the company's law firm, even though his services would have been pro bono. When Stiller and Myers finally realized that Huck Jameson had been instrumental in their defeats, they approached him with a job offer. He laughed and turned down their first and all subsequent offers. When they learned that he was acting as an unpaid agent, they finally wondered why. After learning that they were being pursued because of Garcia, they made him an offer, which he accepted. He would not work against them without pay if they would release Bobby from his job. In doing so, he reserved the right to go up against them with any paying clients. One of the law firms that twice refused his help was Strum and Deutsch. They subsequently lost both cases, not only with huge sums but also with additional punitive damages. The companies, each of which wanted to accept Habakkuk's offer but yielded to the law firm's refusal, subsequently fired Strum and Deutsch. The law firm blamed their firing on Habakkuk and happily hired Garcia. Unlike Stiller and Myers, S&D was a highly professional and respected group of lawyers. Their clients were huge firms that paid 6- and 7-figure fees each year, exceeding the actual value of S&D's legal services. Nevertheless, the loss of the client was painful, and as punishment, they expected to humiliate Huck in court. Garcia was relegated to a paralegal position while those in power searched for a case that would not jeopardize their large bills. The case against Meredith Larkin was a perfect fit. The client was not one of their corporate clients, but was a cousin of one of the senior partners. The case was being handled as a favor to a cousin who was trying to acquire Meredith's property for herself. Bobby was happy that he was finally being assigned a case, and even as a presenter. He would finally be able to show his superiors what an excellent lawyer he could be. His confidence waned when the 2 junior partners were joined by paralegals, and it soon became clear that Garcia was a lead only on paper. Next chapter. Gloria Garcia was forced out. It was fun at first as Bobby and her put Eve to bed, and she even anticipated Ernie joining in the fun. So, a few times on Friday night, she'd made the excuse that she was going out with her girlfriends from work and then heading to Sappho's, her favorite bar. To hell with men. That night, she took a quick first drink of tequila and then signaled the bartender, looking around the room. She was surprised to see a familiar face light up when they met eyes. It was Regina, one of her junior high school students from 2 years ago. Regina smiled broadly and walked over to Gloria. "Mrs. Garcia, my favorite teacher." Regina kissed Gloria on the cheek. "Call me Gloria, Regina. You are no longer my student." Gloria patted the stool next to her. "Gloria, I have to tell you. I've always been head over heels in love with you." She laughed. Of course, there wasn't much competition, considering that many of the teachers were dried-up old nuns. "Are you still in love? You're 18 now, aren't you?" she asked hoarsely. "My sister is leaving today. We could leave the house alone." Regina tilted her head and raised her eyebrows with an unspoken question. "Let's go!" Gloria didn't have to think long. Their affair lasted exactly 2 Fridays. For the second week, Gloria went straight to Regina's house. At the climax, the bedroom door opened, and Regina's sister Ronnie appeared with a camera in hand. Gloria jumped up. "Stop that picture taking. You have to erase it now," she demanded. Ronnie laughed and said, "Sure, no problem. I wasn't actually filming." Next chapter. "When Ralph died," Meredith began, I was a mess. It was just Ruby and me. Kissing the girl on her lap, she told Huck her story. Ralph had no family, just like me, and he managed all the bills and savings. I was hopeless at it. So when Martha, my neighbor, came to help, I thought she had saved my life. Ruby wasn't even a year old at the time, and I was shocked. Ralph was proud that I was a housewife. I had never worked outside the home, so bringing up Ruby and making a home for my family was supposed to be my only job. But when Ralph was diagnosed with cancer, and suddenly, she stopped and hugged Ruby as another sob escaped her lips. Suddenly, Ralph was gone. And so was our income. I thought he had a life insurance policy, but I never could find it. Martha seemed so responsive. She sorted out my mail, sat with Ruby while I went to work, first at McDuffie's Burgers, then a second job at Priceco to make enough money to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. The real trouble started when Martha offered to move in with her, so it would be easier to take care of Ruby without having to shuttle back and forth. When I worked nights in the warehouse at Priceco, she could sleep in the guest room. It made sense, and she was so kind, I agreed. We really had become a family, I thought. When the tax bill came, she paid it before I even saw it. She said she knew I didn't have any money to spare. I had just started working, so it took a few months before I could make enough money to pay her back. I even had to sell some of my jewelry to raise enough money. Then she asked for the money in cash, said it would save her from going to the bank. She laughed bitterly. Saves her from going to the bank. What nonsense. Let me guess, Huck interrupted. Good old Martha lives here and pays taxes. She probably figured out how to pay them for the next few years too, didn't she? Just saved you the trouble, and you paid her off in cash. Meredith nodded sadly. The lawyer looked at Ruby. You're a big girl now, aren't you, sweetheart? Let me guess. You're probably 5, aren't you? The girl smiled proudly and nodded. 5 years old. Martha claims ownership by title, doesn't she? She lived here and paid taxes for 5 years, and you never objected. He shook his head. I never had a chance to object. I was at work all day and she was getting the mail. The first time I heard about taxes was when Martha asked me to reimburse her. She wiped her eyes. I thought we were family. She's been so helpful to me. I didn't realize she moved in with me because she was renting the apartment next door. She moved in to save money on rent, but I was grateful to her for helping Ruby so much. It was a fair exchange. In California, there's a 5-year time limit before you can claim adverse possession. Martha obviously knew that and chose you. The difficulty will be proving that you paid her back taxes. It's undeniable that she's lived here all these 5 years, and I'm sure she has receipts to prove the taxes were paid. She nodded. He continued. And she's arranged it so you have no way to show that you paid her. Cash doesn't usually leave a trail. Hopefully she made a mistake and transferred your money to her account. If we can subpoena her bank records, we'll have a case. It's going to be hard without it. Meredith snorted. I don't know what I'm going to do. I managed to get Martha out of the house, but I can't afford to change the locks, and she still has the keys. And I can't go to work. I have nowhere to leave Ruby. Smiling at the distraught woman, he pulled out his phone. We can fix all this. When he called a locksmith, she objected, saying she couldn't let him do it, that she wouldn't be able to pay him back. He raised his hand to cut off her objections while he gave instructions to the locksmith, who promised to come right away. After hanging up, he told her that she didn't have to pay him back, that he just wanted her to be safe. When she still objected, he thought he understood her. Look, people are helping me. People who didn't have to help me paid for things, and one, his eyes were watering from the memory, one very special person left me his inheritance. Believe me, that's not a problem. And if you think I'm just another Martha who wants to take advantage of you somehow, I'll be happy to draw up an agreement that says, 1. I take on your case at no cost, all costs and expenses fall solely on me, and 2. Your safety and Ruby's safety are considered an important part of the case, and will therefore be provided solely at my expense. He smiled, summoning Rosa, who was his assistant at JA&F. She was a Hispanic woman in her late 50s who had 8 children, the youngest of whom was only 10 years old. I told her about Meredith's childcare problems and asked how she was handling her own. 15 minutes later, the agency she was using promised to send some potential babysitters the next day for Meredith to approve. Meredith cried in frustration and said she couldn't pay for it. All right, Huck suggested. Tell you what, we'll sue Martha and you can pay me out of the proceeds when we win. And if we don't win? She asked. That's my concern, not yours. I'm happy. You can go back to work and Ruby will be taken care of. Isn't that what we're hoping for? The argument was ended by the arrival of a locksmith. 2 hours later, all the locks were changed, and Huck left with the locksmith, promising to return for a childcare interview. Eva and Ernie were left out of work, as the school board was presented with photographs of their relationship, as well as Eva and Garcias' relationship. Photos obtained by private investigator Huck, using a camera hidden in a supply closet in the classroom, showing the couple having fun at work were sufficient. The other photos were unnecessary. However, the male board members appreciated the overkill. Gloria was on point, as was Eva, as did some of the women. When Eva was told that the reasons for her dismissal would be included in all the recommendations the school had to provide, she realized that her career in education, which she had enjoyed so much, was probably over. Furthermore, she would never be able to afford a doctorate. The idiot Ernie tried to console her by suggesting that she go to his house to talk one-on-one. Angrily pushing Ernie away, she cursed him and told him that it was over between them, that she never wanted to see him again. She also cursed her ex-husband and vowed revenge. It was enough for her that she had lost everything in the divorce, lost the lifestyle that her husband's wealth had provided. She realized she had given her husband the ammunition he needed when she foolishly discovered she had used him, married him solely for her own financial gain. Still, that asshole shouldn't have been so vindictive. Thank God the Garcias were still willing to give her shelter. She didn't have enough money for her own place. She pondered how she would cement her relationship with Bobby. He had finally gotten a job at a great law firm, not like the firm Huck had fired him from. Then again, he didn't have to be so damn vindictive. But now that Bobby was working at an even better firm than Jameson, Atkins and Fisher, maybe he could fund her doctoral dissertation. Then Eve could find a college to work at. She just won't mention teaching high school, and she'll never have to ask for a recommendation. Next chapter. Huck stopped Gloria in the parking lot as she was leaving school. She almost ran back inside when she saw him, knowing how he stalked his wife and her husband. She was afraid of what he would do to her. He had threatened her with a job the night he caught them all, but he never fulfilled his promise. Hi, Gloria. I have a movie I want to show you. Huck held out the iPad. This never happened. I'm not doing this, hissed Gloria, looking around to make sure no one was around to hear. No one was. Oh yeah? Maybe I'm wrong. Let's watch the video. He pressed play. No, that didn't happen. You can't use that tape, pleaded Gloria. Oh yes, I can, he stated, smiling smugly. Of course I won't if you're willing to work with me. While Gloria agreed to anything, she insisted, he looked over her body. He had watched the videos of her, his wife, and Bobby several times, and she was worthy of attention. He intended to enjoy a few sessions with this bitch before going ahead with his plans for revenge. He had a few graduation ceremonies with Mona right after his marriage fell apart, but since then, Mona had fallen in love with a soulmate and gotten married. It had been quite some time since then, and Huck could think of a few things he'd wanted to do with Gloria. Besides, he had revenge to exact on Bobby and his wife. And he wanted to reward his private investigator. And then there were a few other people Gloria might not like, but Huck could insist on his own. And then there were the sisters. Huck called Ronnie to tell her how well everything had worked out and to thank her and Regina again for their help. Ronnie brushed off his thanks. Hey man, you've helped out Twisted Sisters a few times already, all pro bono. We were happy to help you out. Huck made a mental note to add the sisters to the list of favors Gloria was scheduled to provide. Bobby assured Martha that they had a good chance of unraveling the case. They could prove that Martha had lived in the house for more than 5 years and had paid the property taxes herself for all 5 years, without objection from Meredith Larkin. The case was open and shut. The case was so compelling that the two junior partners walked away from it, telling Bobby that they were sure even he couldn't screw it up. Bobby didn't mention it to Martha as they smiled smugly at each other. Discovery let Huck's forensic accountant examine her bank accounts, which clearly showed taxes paid, but there were no deposits restoring that money to Martha's accounts. Huck was stumped. The facts seemed to be lining up against Meredith. Huck believed her version of events, but didn't know how to prove the truth to the court. It was his private investigator who saved the day. He valued Huck's weekly gift of the Glorious Gloria so much that he spent time and money illegally bugging Robert's office and the apartment Martha had moved into. And so, under Bobby's pressure, Martha admitted that she had a secret investment account into which her tax refunds were deposited. Huck could access that secret account. It would also hurt Martha's case when the judge found out that she and her attorney had hidden the account. Huck would have to find a legal way to discover this account so that it could be established that Garcia knew about it. But during Martha's meeting with Bobby, a bonus occurred. She claimed that Ralph Larkin had an insurance policy with XYZ Insurance Company that Meredith never cashed in. Martha had all the correspondence with the insurance company, and she wanted Bobby to find a way to file a claim against her. To her disappointment, Bobby couldn't come up with a single scenario where Martha could make a claim on her roommate's life insurance policy. But as Meredith's attorney, Huck contacted XYZ that same day and found out that Ralph had a $2 million policy that he had taken out before he was married. XYZ confirmed that the premiums were paid until 5 years ago, when the premiums began to be deducted from the cash value of the policy. They informed Huck that the cash value would be depleted before the end of the year, at which point the policy would terminate. But we've already informed Mr. Larkin of all this by correspondence. Why do you ask? Rapier Huck informed them that Ralph had died 5 years ago and that the account had been illegally withheld from his widow. When the representative objected, the attorney assured them that he did not suspect or accuse the insurance company of any wrongdoing. On the contrary, he was confident that they had acted honestly and that the illegal acts had been committed by a third party. However, he informed the representative that Meredith would be filing a claim based on her husband's death 5 years earlier. He then called Rosa and asked her to call several banks and investment companies to see if Martha had any accounts with them. On the list he sent to Rosa was the firm that Martha had told Bobby about. When Rosa revealed that Martha had accounts not only at that investment firm, but also at another bank, Huck was able to get a warrant to get documents on those accounts from an unsurprisingly pissed-off judge. When they presented the accounts to the judge, they found cash deposits there that matched the taxes paid. Huck also presented the judge with copies of all correspondence that the insurance company had sent to Meredith that she had never received. Convinced that Martha had handled all the mail, the judge issued a search warrant and instructed the police to conduct a search of Martha's apartment. They were able to uncover insurance correspondence that Martha had saved in the greedy hope that she would somehow be able to collect on the policy debt. They also discovered notices from the state indicating that Martha had filed a claim for title to the property and had concealed it from Meredith. The judge turned the evidence over to the district attorney, recommending that a fraud case be filed against Martha. When the court fined Martha for concealing information about her investment and bank accounts, Bobby argued that the accounts had simply been overlooked because Martha had assured Bobby that they were irrelevant to her case. Huck shook his head, realizing how stupid Bobby was. He then got Bobby to fully admit that he knew about the accounts, but again insisted that they were irrelevant. The judge didn't see it that way. He referred Bobby and his firm, Strum and Deutsch, to the bar. The judge noted that the firm's two junior partners were listed as associates in the case. The Bar Association eventually sanctioned the firm, but disbarred Robert Garcia for willful malfeasance. Next chapter. Before disbarment, Bobby was surprised by a divorce petition from his wife, citing adultery with Eva and Ernie as the reason. Her lawyer? Habakkuk Jameson. Although Garcia claimed there was no adultery, that he and Gloria had an open marriage, Huck countered that the marriage was open to participants and both partners were engaged. His private investigator, and Gloria's secret, albeit unwanted lover, with Gloria's permission, set up several cameras in their home that captured not only Ernie and Eva with Bobby without Gloria's involvement, but also conversations about Bobby replacing Gloria with Eva. Garcia's demeanor in the courtroom deteriorated during the trial, in which he insisted on representing himself. By the end of the trial, his arguments could be described as whining, which irritated the judge. This irritation manifested itself in his rulings. At the end of the trial, Huck was able to get Gloria 60% of their net worth, as well as the right to live in their home for the next 5 years, after which Gloria could buy out her husband or sell the house. Gloria would be entitled to 60% of any profits. During those 5 years, Bobby was still to be responsible for 50% of the house expenses, including the mortgage. If he couldn't make those payments, they would be deducted from his 40% ownership, including interest. Huck felt that his revenge on Robert Garcia had been accomplished, especially when the license revocation order was served the following week. Huck gave Gloria to a private investigator who, fat, bald, and 50 years old, couldn't believe his luck. He had never had a mistress who was as gorgeous as Gloria. Under threat of criminal charges, Gloria agreed to a 6-month sentence. Gloria decided that 26 sessions with this smelly man was better than years in jail. It was during the 5th weekend that the private investigator introduced Gloria to his friends. When Gloria's divorce was finalized, Eva found herself in deep shit. She began to roam the bed and breakfasts, staying with acquaintances who had dreamed of entertaining her for years, but soon tired of the bitchy bitch who was good fun but incredibly demanding outside the bedroom. She rarely stayed in the same bed for a month. With no money in the bank and refusing to go to school, Eva applied and was accepted into a management training program for a retail company. Eva hated the idea. The position was clearly beneath her dignity. But as she was running out of lovers who could offer her at least temporary shelter, she needed a job to pay for an apartment that made her student apartments seem like mansions in comparison. She cursed her husband again for bringing her to this state. It was Huck's fault. It was, she told herself. As she drowned her sorrows in the cheapest whiskey the rundown bar had to offer, the seat next to her was suddenly taken by a large, bearded man. "What if I give you $250? Ready to lash out at the man for his impoliteness, she suddenly realized that $250 was more than her salary for 2 days' work. She sized up the man. How bad could it be? She smiled at the man. When Huck brought Meredith papers from XYZ for her to fill out, she collapsed on the couch and sobbed. Next chapter. Huck and Ruby rushed over to comfort her. Huck pulled her against him and comforted her, while Ruby and he told her that it was okay, that it was good. Gasping, Meredith sat on Huck's lap and was finally able to mumble, $2 million. $2 million. She wrapped her arms around Ruby and pulled them both against Huck's chest. I was so afraid. I had nothing. How could I take care of Ruby? We were so lost. She pressed herself against his chest again and sat in silence for a few moments. Then she wrapped her arms around Huck's neck and kissed him passionately. You are our hero, she whispered. A year later, Ruby became a bridesmaid and Rose became the matron of honor. Huck watched with pride as Meredith floated down the aisle in the arms of her uncle, Howard Jameson. He knew this was the woman who loved him. God knows she was bringing him back to life not only for a second, but a third round. His smile grew wider as he thought of the pleasure this woman gave him. They had gotten married just in time. Soon it would be clear to everyone that Ruby would soon be a big sister.